Welcome to the FCC virtual conference. Now, normally we would be doing this training sessions at our regular conference, but of course with COVID, we're not able to do that this year, so it's virtual. The training is going to be outstanding. We offer with these great people to come in and speak before you, and you're going to really appreciate the quality of our trainers. We also offer the same CEUs that you could get in person. You get these same CEUs. So we're glad that you're a part of this. It's unfortunate we couldn't all be together, but one of the benefits is that we're not just having the trainings in a very short period of time at our conference. We're going to provide this across the next couple of months, maybe even into 2021. So stay tuned to the good trainings that we're going to have, and we're glad we're able to provide these for you. Our conference sponsor is Sunshine Health. We appreciate them so much. They've been such great partners. And our other sponsor is also Selfless. They do a great work for us here at the Coalition. So we hope that you enjoy this training session. We look forward to seeing you in the future at our conferences. And now let me hand this off to our FCC team to introduce today's speaker.
Thank you, Kurt. Today's session of the 2020 virtual conference is the value of youth voice in preparation for self-sufficiency, sponsored by the Selfless Love Foundation. Our speakers include Brandie McCabe and Dr. Elizabeth Wynter of the Selfless Love Foundation, Dr. Amy Dworsky, with a research fellow with Chapin Hall, and our One Voice Impact Youth, Diamond Whitley, John Watson, and Rayla James. Thank you everyone for joining us today. At this point, I will turn it over to our presenters. And Brandie, whenever you're ready, you can start sharing your screen and today's PowerPoint.
All right, thank you. We'll get started. So this is the value of youth voice in preparation for self-sufficiency. And we want to just thank you so much for being here today with us and joining us for round 2 of our webinar series, The Value of Youth Voice. So I am actually I'm advancing slides as I'm talking with you here today. We've got an agenda. So we've got a great team here with us. Dr. Wynter, I don't know if you wanted to present the agenda first, or I know you wanted to introduce our speakers today as well. Did you want to take yourself off mute?
Sorry, that was not my issue, but technical issues as always. But good afternoon, everyone, and welcome so much, and thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for valuing youth voice. We are so excited that we are working with Casey Family Programs and Chapin Hall, which really are just the leaders in this area in transitioning youth. So what has been so exciting for Brandie and myself is to be able to work with these leaders in research and advocacy and have our youth, our One Voice Impact youth, Rayla and Diamond and John, get an opportunity to co-create and co-present these presentations, which has been just an outstanding opportunity for all of them. And so as I turn to this, first of all, I have to say, as we are in these weird situations, we have to talk about the elephant in the room. Welcome to my home, everyone, as I'm coming to you to your home as well. It's wonderful that, that we all have the opportunity to connect with one another during these crazy times that don't seem to have an end. So, so thank you for the opportunity again. We are so excited. So you'll see the agenda on your screen. So today we are going to start with Dr. Amy Dworsky to talk about sort of what do we know from nationally, what do we know about youth aging out of the foster care system? What are we doing in Florida? And how are we doing in Florida? And so Brandie will speak to you on some of that. And then Diamond and John and Rayla are just fabulous, outstanding youth that we've been working with, and they're going to share with you some of their stories of transition from dependence to independence. We hope. I don't expect that happens overnight, but that process, and then really speak to you about, you know, how can we listen to our youth that are in the system, value what they're saying, and improve that transition for them, because they're the folks that know this, right? And so, but before we get started, Jess Henker-Kolcher, who is a director of Florida for Casey Family Programs, has been a vital participant in this. And Jess has been a director with Casey for 5 years, and previous to that, she was in South Carolina as the deputy director of the Department of Social Services. And so I asked Jess if she would be willing to share with you, why Casey Family Programs is so interested in this topic. And so Jess, if you can come on screen and do that, that would be awesome.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Winters. And I have just, this experience with the youth has been amazing for me. Child welfare often looks at data and information and believes they understand the problem and begins to create solutions with that. And often we get it wrong. And so as we at Casey have been embarking on looking at how might we listen to people who have lived experience or are living experience, really create something new. We have an opportunity in this world right now. And how might we design something that really meets the needs of those who know? How might we stop and really listen to those who have lived it or are currently living the experience, to create something that's just, maybe we don't even know yet what it will be. So I am just thrilled to be a part of this work with Rayla and Diamond and John. I've learned so much from these youth over the last couple of months in bringing these webinars to you all. And I learn each time. So I hope that you all will be open to hearing today, and just thank you for this opportunity to partner with you all in Florida.
So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Dworsky, and I will be running your slides again. Oh, can you get off? You, Dr. Wynter. All right. We're having some technical difficulties. This is where we're doing a lot of.
Okay, I'm sorry. Somebody must not want to talk to me today, or listen to me today. And so, yes, I was having a little muting problem, but no worries. Also, I wanted to let you know, I introduced Jess, but I didn't get an opportunity. Brandie is our Director of Youth Initiatives, and I'm the Executive Director for the Selfless Love Foundation. So I just wanted to open that up. So as I pass it on to Dr. Amy Dworsky, again, nerd alert, when I did my dissertation on transitioning youth, I got an opportunity to read everything Dr. Dworsky has written. It was just enlightening, and she continues to be just an incredible researcher. So Dr. Dworsky is a research fellow at Chapin Hall at the University of Chicago. Her research focuses on vulnerable youth populations, including youth in foster care and youth experiencing homelessness. She also has done several studies on foster care youth that are pregnant or parenting, and the children of those youth. And currently, Dr. Dworsky is working with a team of researchers from the Urban Institute on a federally funded program focused on building evidence base for programs that serve young people transitioning out of foster care. She is an incredibly knowledgeable source for us, and so we're thrilled to have her. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Dworsky. And I am not going back on mute because I'm not sure they're going to let me off ever. So there we go.
Thank you for that introduction. So I'm going to talk today about the transition to adulthood for young people in foster care. Next slide. So just to provide a little bit of background, this is a conceptual model that was developed by some of my colleagues at the Urban Institute. And I think it really helps understand the whole idea of the transition to adulthood among young people in foster care and what the kind of factors that are affecting their outcome. So what this shows is young people come to the transition to adulthood with both background factors. So these are their personal characteristics, characteristics of the families that they came from, other prior experiences, including their experiences with abuse, neglect, and other traumas. They also are influenced by various factors related to their time in foster care. So this includes the type of independent living services that they may have received, various formal services and support. So for example, that could be employment programs or mental health services, and then informal support. So this could be foster parents or relative caregivers or other kinds of informal supports that they had access to while they were in foster care. So they come to the transition with these background factors and foster care factors, and then they have developed certain number of assets. So these are the independent living skills that they've accumulated, human capital, which could be their education, their employment experiences, social connections. Again, this could be connections to foster parents, their biological families, peers, other adults, material resources. So this may be income or savings that they've accumulated, and then psychosocial and relationship skills. So things like being able to regulate your emotions, your ability to interact with others in a social setting. And these developmental assets really have a big impact on the outcomes that young people experience. So the outcomes we're talking about are things like your level of educational attainment, your employment, whether or not you have stable housing, the relationships you develop, your physical and mental health and well-being, and then social behavior, which could include things like involvement with the criminal justice system. Next slide. So what do we know about the outcomes of young people leaving care? So in general, young people leaving care struggle during that transition to adulthood to do a number of things: to complete their education, to find and maintain stable employment, to find and maintain stable housing, and to support themselves and their children if they are parents. Next slide. So a number of studies have looked at how young people leaving foster care compare to their peers who were not in foster care. And what we find, and I want to stress that this is on average, so there are some young people who don't experience these things, but this is sort of an average picture. Young people leaving care are less likely to graduate from high school. They're less likely to enroll in college. They're less likely to graduate from college if they enroll. They're less likely to be stably employed. They're less likely to earn a living wage if they are working. And they're more likely to experience homelessness and other types of housing instability. So again, this is sort of the average picture. They also face a number, next slide. They also face a number of challenges during this transition period. These include early pregnancy and parenthood, a history of justice system involvement, their history of abuse, neglect, and other traumas, a lack of relationships with the supportive adults, and high rates of mental health and substance use disorders. Next slide. So given this background, what we know about the challenges these young people face, what do we know about what works in terms of improving their outcomes? Next slide. So I think this diagram that I show you here really captures what the situation looks like. So there's been lots of programs for transition age youth in foster care that have been developed and implemented in states across the country. However, relatively few of those programs have been rigorously evaluated. And by rigorously evaluated, I mean the kind of study where you have a group of young people who participate in the program and then some sort of comparison group of young people who didn't get those services and supports. And of those programs that have been rigorously evaluated, even fewer have actually been shown to improve the outcomes of young people. Next slide. So there's been, these are a couple of the kinds of evaluation efforts that we've seen over the years. So one was the Chafee multi-site evaluation of foster youth programs. And this was a federally funded study that started about 10 years ago. And they evaluated 4 independent living programs very different types of programs, a couple focused on education, one focused on employment. And of these 4 programs that they rigorously evaluated using this comparison group design that I talked about, only one of those 4 programs had a positive impact on any of the outcomes that they looked at. So that was kind of disappointing. More recently, the Youth Villages Transitional Living Evaluation has found some positive results. So this is an intensive case management program for young people transitioning out of care. And they actually found positive impacts on earnings, housing stability, and economic well-being. They also in fact found some evidence of improved outcomes with respect to health and safety. However, they found no effects on education, social support, or justice system involvement. So these 2 evaluations are really the only really good, rigorous evidence we have of that have looked at these kind of programs for transition age young people. And so as you can see, there's just not a lot of evidence out there when it comes to what works for improving young people's outcomes. Next slide. So that said, there are efforts underway to build the evidence base. And one of those is a project that I've been involved with for a number of years with a team of colleagues at the Urban Institute. And we call this the Chafee Next Generation Project. So for those of you who are not familiar with Chafee, Chafee is the federal program that was started a number of years ago, back actually in 1999, that increased funding, federal funding to states to help prepare young people for the transition to adulthood. And this is the money that most states and counties use to fund their independent living programs. So as part of the Chafee, so what we've been doing is looking for programs that we could potentially evaluate to see if they are having an impact on young people's outcomes. And we've been looking across a number of domains to identify promising programs. And in particular, we've been focusing on post-secondary educational attainment, employment, and housing. And so me and my colleagues have been spending the past couple of years looking at programs across the country in these domains, trying to find some programs that have the potential for rigorous evaluation. So that work is really still very much underway. Next slide. So the other approach to improving young people's outcomes, besides these kind of domain-specific programs that I've talked about, is extended foster care. So as of today, more than half the states have opted to allow young people to remain in federally funded foster care until their 21st birthday. And this extension was made possible by some legislation that was passed back in 2018. I'm sorry, 2008. To be eligible for extended foster care, young people must meet at least one of the following criteria. They must be completing high school or the equivalent, enroll in a school that provides post-secondary or vocational education, participating in activities designed to promote or remove barriers to employment, to be employed at least 80 hours a month, and or to be incapable of doing any of the other things due to a medical condition. So as I mentioned, more than half the states have opted to extend foster care to young people to their 21st birthday. So now we're able to look at how young people in those states are faring. Next slide. So there's evidence from 2 studies about the benefits of extended foster care. One is the Midwest study, which was actually a study that was done prior to the federal extension. Remember, I said the federal extension happened in 2008, and the Midwest study actually started way back in 2002. But one of the states in the Midwest study, Illinois, had actually extended foster care using state funding. And so what we were able to do is compare the outcomes of young people in Illinois to the outcomes of young people in Iowa and Wisconsin. And I'll talk about some of those findings in a minute. The other study that's been looking at extended foster care is the CAL-U study. And this is a study being led by one of my colleagues, Mark Courtney. And obviously, as the name implies, it's a study of extended foster care out in California. And that study's been going on since 2012. And I'll also talk about some of the findings from that study. So next slide. So the Midwest study, as I mentioned, we were able to compare the outcomes of young people in Illinois, where they had extended foster care, to the outcomes of young people in Wisconsin and Iowa, which did not. And as you can see from this graph, young people in Illinois were much more likely to complete at least a year of college than their peers in the other states. So 46% of young people in Illinois compared to about 30% of young people in the other two states completed at least 1 year of college. A little more disappointing, however, was when we looked at how many young people actually completed a degree. And so as you can see from the second set of bars on the right side, the young people in Illinois really were no more likely than their peers to actually finish college. And what we think was going on was that the extension of foster care in Illinois allowed young people to get in the door of college. So they were able to enroll and get started on their studies. But because foster care ended at age 21, before they had a chance to complete their education, a lot of those supports were removed. And that might explain why their college graduation rates were no higher than in the other two states. Next slide. There's also some evidence from the Midwest study that extended foster care can delay homelessness. So these bars show you the percentage of young people who had experienced homelessness by each age point. And as you can see, at age 19, the rate of homelessness in Illinois was about half that in the other two states combined. However, once you get out to age 21 and beyond, the rates are indistinguishable. So again, this suggests that allowing young people to stay in care until 21 was helping to prevent them from becoming homeless. But once those supports get removed, that protection also disappears, and they're just as vulnerable as their peers. Next slide. So there's also some evidence from the CAL-U study about the benefits of extended foster care. And specifically, they looked at what the benefits of each additional year in extended foster care was associated with. And as you can see, there was a number of positive things. So it increased the probability of completing high school, the probability of enrolling in college, the number of quarters in which young people had employment, and their probability of having young people to turn to for support. It also reduced the probability of a number of negative outcomes. So it decreased the probability of having economic hardships. It decreased the probability of homelessness or couch surfing. It decreased the probability of a pregnancy, and it decreased the probability of an arrest or conviction. However, the researchers found no effect on college persistence, which kind of is similar to what we found in the Midwest study, and no effect on earnings, health, or food security. Next slide. So the evidence around the benefits of extended foster care is a little mixed. I think part of that is that we're still learning. I think states are still developing what extended foster care looks like. Each state is taking a little bit different approach. States have considerable latitude in terms of where young people in extended foster care can live and the types of services that they receive. But what the research overall so far suggests that extended foster care can help put young people on a trajectory towards success, but really it has to be done in a developmentally appropriate way. States need to be cognizant of the fact that the needs of young adults are different from those of children. And that means, for example, that they need different types of placement options, and that young adults require less protection and more opportunities for independence. So, for example, some of the rules that may apply to young people under 18 regarding whether or not they can be out without permission, for example, those rules may not make sense for young adults who really need the chance to exercise their independence. Next slide. So that's the end of my presentation. I don't know if we're doing questions now or at the end.
Yeah, we'll stop for a moment. Thank you, Dr. Dworsky. Does anyone have any questions? Allison, if you'll let us know if there's questions in the chat. If not, we will go on to the next section. But thank you so much, Dr. Dworsky. I know when I read the Cal Youth Study, one thing it mentioned was that perhaps a one-size-fits-all approach to extended foster care, because of the different levels of developmental, where our youth are, may not be appropriate. So do you have any, I'll just ask you the question because I'm not sure if we have other questions, but what your thoughts are about that, because I found that really sort of telling.
I think that's exactly right. And that's why we need a range of different options. So a range of different placement options, a range of different services. Because yeah, young people have different needs depending on their individual, what their histories have been, what their strengths and weaknesses are. So yes, I think that makes total sense.
All right, thank you so much. Next, we'll turn to Brandie.
Thanks, guys. I was actually trying to let you guys know, okay, no questions from the participants yet at this time, but the good news is that if you guys have additional questions, you can always save them. We'll have another Q&A session more at the end, but please feel free to send in questions, submit questions, and then we'll take pauses. Like I said, we'll take a pause later. Thank you. All right, so it's this, sorry guys, it's a little bit awkward when you're trying to navigate the slides and then also the Zoom. I know all of you that are familiar with Zoom can appreciate that. There's a lot of different muting, unmuting, and all those wonderful things. But this is a great time to take a deep breath, right? I'm processing still what Dr. Dworsky said, and I really wanted to pose the question, are Florida's independent living programs adequately preparing youth for self-sufficiency? I think that's a really good question to ponder. So as we proceed with the presentation today, just wanted to ask you, so, if you, no matter what, where you fit in terms of the child welfare world, if you're a child welfare professional, if you're some external stakeholder, that you provide funding for support. We appreciate all of our participants listening today. It means you're interested and you really do value youth voice and are interested in independent living. And so one of the things I wanted to make sure, that I mentioned was, we really, I don't know that we can answer the question. From my purview, I think there's a lot of good anecdotal information. And of course, we have research from Dr. Dworsky to present some good indicators in terms of, like where we need to move. But in terms of where Florida's programs land, there's a lot to be considered. And I think a good place to start when we think about analyzing programs is for those of you that may not know, we have 3 programs here in the state of Florida. We have extended foster care. So that's a win for us, right? Post-secondary education services and supports. We call it PESS, P-E-S-S. That's an easier way to say it. And we have aftercare services. And extended foster care and post-secondary education services and supports really are the 2 main programs, and they ensure that young participants are really secured with housing. I think that's important to note because I think that's extremely foundational in terms of seeing better outcomes in general, is that if they have a firm footing, right, a place to call home, then we're getting started, right, in terms of outcomes. High level, just wanted to let everyone know, state of Florida has actually had extended foster care since 2014. So although we were one of the states that embraced this extended foster care early on, we didn't really have a true federal extended foster care program until 2019. So the programs, 2014 was like a redesign. That's when we had extended foster care. 2019 is when we really refined some of the policies and procedures, standardized across the state to allow us to draw in federal funding. And so I think that's important to note when we're considering funding aspects of programming. And earlier, Dr. Dworsky had talked about Chafee and Chafee funding. And so that is another primary source of federal funding, is Chafee and Title IV federal funding. So I don't want to get too into the details of that and lose you all, other than to, again, thinking about the question, are the programs that we have in the state of Florida helping young people to self-sufficiency? Again, we're just asking that question as we kind of probe and go forward. And so another, understanding the programs is one thing, right? So those are all the programmatic pieces. There's eligibility criteria for each program. So that's what, having that set up is important. But when we really want to do some analysis on how we're faring is, we want to go to the sources of data. Typically that's the first place we look. Is anecdotal's good, but we really need data to help us. And so the two main sources of data would be the National Youth and Transition Database, and then of course through our Florida Department of Children and Families, our Florida Safe Families Network system of reporting. And that's like for those of you who aren't familiar with the child welfare world, we call it FSFN, Florida Safe Families Network. That's our system of record. So there we're putting a lot of information into the system, and theoretically, right, we could draw it out and then do analysis on that data and come up with some outcomes. But what we found is that, and there's a linkage here, the National Youth and Transition Database is the federal mechanism, if you will, to track the independent living services that we're providing. So again, back to the Chafee funding, for federal purposes, for accountability, they're tracking what services we're delivering through our system of record, Florida Safe Families Network, and then it's being transmitted through the National Youth and Transition Database. And so they're collecting the information for all the states. And so when we think about the National Youth and Transition Database, NYTD is what we often call it for short, because again, we have to use acronyms, otherwise we would, you get tongue-tied. So the NYTD is really important in aspects of, again, documenting the specific services we're providing to young people, like, for example, housing, education, and home management. That would be something if we were providing a young person assistance with a lease agreement, or taking them to look at some housing complex or something of that nature. Those would be things where we would record in our system of record, and it documents a service that our state is providing through our contracted dollars or however. And then that is information that's collected. And then in terms of the NYTD survey is another aspect of data. And so there are, and I'll get into that in the next slide, but that is a self-report. And so those are some key pieces to understanding when we're asking ourselves the question, are the independent living services programs that we're providing, that we're offering here in the state of Florida, helping young people to self-sufficiency? And so really back to the National Youth and Transition Database surveys specifically, the even though the data collection has been around since like 2011, the Administration for Children and Families, again, put the National Youth in Transition database together to track, right, the independent living services across the nation. And then most of the information that's tracked is really about, in as I see it, outputs. You know, what services are we providing? Not so much qualitative. The only area where we kind of get to see true like outcome information would be through this self-report survey. And so it's done based on cohorts. And the last successful cohort, cohort 2, is from 2014. It surveyed 17-year-olds. And then those 17-year-olds that were in the cohort go ahead and they get, if they agree, they get surveyed again at 19 and at 21. And so upon that completion of the cohort, here's some Florida data. And not digging in too deep, but just wanted to, you know, reflect on, you know, areas where, again, wearing an analysis hat or quality hat, like where should we see gains? And in terms of like high school degree or a GED, yes, we would like to see an increase in that in terms of young people that are being surveyed. So as they get older, we would like to see a successful completion of a degree. Additionally, you know, when we think about high-risk behavior, things like pregnancy that was mentioned earlier by Dr. Dworsky, wanting to see a reduction in that, but incarceration, definitely we will want to see a reduction. So I'd say in the state of Florida for our cohort, we're seeing some gains there. Homelessness is one that, you know, unfortunately, you know, we're seeing, you know, we saw an increase. And this, again, is based on a self-report survey. These are specific questions that are being asked of this cohort group. Another important thing to note for the NIDed survey is that it doesn't really, in terms of the representation of this cohort group, all the 17-year-olds are in out-of-home care at the time they're surveyed, right? That's what gives them the you know, triggers the onset of the survey. But at 19, they may or may not be participating in an independent living program, a young adult program. And so at 19 and at 21, some of these young people may or may not have participated in independent living. So again, like considering that when we're doing like data analysis and being really mindful, you know, what is this telling us about our programs in getting young people to self-sufficiency? And we can't really look at this NIDed survey data alone. The next place to look, you know, and I was talking earlier about FSFN, Florida Safe Families Network, our system, our state system of record. And ideally, right, again, we could extract information out of this system and do analysis and figure out really where, you know, how are we faring in terms of outcomes. And this is actually something that our legislature has asked us to do through the Independent Living Services Annual Report. It's a statutorily mandated report that we turn over and produce, you know, for our governor and our legislators. And this is something that, again, not always having the data that is necessary to really give us the picture that we're looking for. It's been complicated, to say the least. The system of record is ever changing in terms of when a policy changes, certain data elements change. And so again, not to get into the nitty gritty of that, other than to just give everyone a level of understanding and awareness that it's complicated to find out really what our outcomes are. And so, and kind of where we want to set some benchmarks. One key thing that I didn't mention that I wanted to quote was actually from the Administration for Children and Families does do a report to Congress based on some of that National Youth in Transition Database data. And they did state that, while states have made progress in improving the quality of data reported to the NYTD, NYTD, but it determined it was premature to identify reliable benchmarks based on the data. So even the federal Administration for Children and Families, in the spirit of, they're realizing that it's hard to identify reliable benchmarks, right? True outcome measures based on the data that has been collected. So this kind of is a good segue into, why One Voice Impact, Florida Coalition for Children and its member agencies, Selfless Love Foundation, and other key stakeholders, young people have come together, and we have a representative group who are participating in an IL quality standards work group, really so we can as a state come together and set ourselves up with some quality standards. And so we have a playbook. But there's key things here that we need to dig into in terms of programming, from eligibility, which is more compliance-based, right? And then also, just from qualitative review of case files, from young people's lived experience, we're going to come together and we're developing some quality standards that we're really excited about this work group, and we're going to continue on this journey until we have some proficiency around the state and some real standards for us to follow. So just, to kind of drive home the point that, we really feel One Voice Impact, Selfless Love Foundation, Florida Coalition for Children, and all its member agencies wants to take the quality standards that we're going to develop. We're going to, rev up on our youth engagement, which we've got a handle on that as well. And we're going to really see some quality outcomes, and we're looking forward to it. So I will turn it over to Dr. Wynter.
Great. Thank you so much, Brandie, for going through all that information. And I just wanted to sort of bring together both what Dr. Dworsky was sharing and what you were sharing. And so with the question of, are Florida's independent living programs, extended foster care, and PES, are they helping, right? Helping youth prepare for self-sufficiency? And the answer, despite all the data that Brandie just shared, is we don't know. We really don't know. And so I'm one that likes to, know where the goalposts are. So we know if all the work we're doing with One Voice Impact and if you haven't heard of One Voice Impact before, it's a youth voice movement. Our desire is really to shift the way youth are seen in our system of care. Oftentimes we view youth as service recipients, but really youth should be viewed as organizational assets and really partners in change. And so as we look at the national data and what the studies in Midwest evaluation and California are telling us about extended foster care is concerning, right? It shows that our youth are struggling. And despite these programs, they're still struggling. They're still struggling with homelessness. They're struggling with completing their education, right? We're giving them these great opportunities to go to college, but they're failing to complete it. And so we have deep concerns about this population, as I know you do, because otherwise you wouldn't be on the call. And so really, I think that really leads us to why we're talking to our youth. We have no real quantitative data that we can turn to tell us how to do this better. But we have youth that have lived experience that can really share with us, how did we do, what can we do better, and what areas should we focus on until we figure out, and we are destined to do this, Brandie and I are destined to, we will find a way to draw those outcomes out of the FISFIN data or through some other methods, but we are determined that is really important that we know what our outcomes are, and that we drive, and that data can drive service delivery. And so it's really important that we understand that. And so one of the things we did with One Voice Impact, and one thing we really do is we always turn to youth and young adults with lived experience. And we held a focus group asking them about their transition, asking them, or I should say asking, listening to them tell stories about their transition. And we take the diligent notes and then also asking them, what could we do better? Right. And I always see our youth as our customer in child welfare. They're the folks we're here to serve and to improve their lives. We've taken on that role as their family. And so it's important, right? Although I wouldn't want to ask my own kids how I'm doing, but but I'll ask our youth. And so we gathered youth voice and asked for them to give us some recommendations. And Brandie, if you'll go to the next slide. I think it's one thing, and I want to share this with you, that anything you will hear from a youth, sometimes people receive the message that youth share in different ways, right? And so if you're working with this population, please don't become defensive and say, well, that's not what I told the youth. I think what's really important as we listen to our youth is, and this is why I have this slide, is what you may have said or shared or think you communicated is not necessarily what they heard, right? And so I think it's important as we look to improve, how do we make sure that we use some clarifying techniques, right? Tell me back what you heard me say, because I think oftentimes when you'll see the next slide, you can go to the next slide, and you'll see that it's clear the youth, either they didn't understand or not clear. And I got to be honest with you, Brandie and I both sat sort of with our mouths agape. And when we listen to these stories, because we're like, oh no, like, how is this possible? But I think it's really important for you to hear. And so I'm going to read these out. And these are quotes, direct quotes from youth that we talked to in our focus group. And I want you to hear them with an open mind, right? An open heart and an open mind, to realize that while, again, this is not what we believe we said or what we intended, but to understand that this is what the youth heard and this is their perspective. And I think that's a great place for us as folks that work with youth to take it from, right? Because it doesn't matter what we said or what we did. If the youth didn't hear it correctly, then there's an issue that we need to think about. How do we message it? How do we communicate it better? And so the first one that literally made me laugh out loud was that a youth said, I feel like the $12.56 we get a month for our post-secondary education is a bribe for us to go to college. I agree. I think it is too. I think many of our youth, just me personally, I feel many of our youth would be first generation college students. Many of our youth have struggled academically because of school transitions. And yet we have this sort of mindset that they should all go to college. I think we have to really think about that and think about what's best for our youth, because there are other options out there. But I think we have to think about how we're communicating that. Another youth shared that she ended up homeless on PES because the person she was living with was taking all her money. Again, these youth are naive, and on PES, we don't have a portion of PES that requires they be seen by case managers or someone, supportive adult talks to them, so they find themselves in these situations that aren't good. And so here's this kid getting $12.56 a month and ends up homeless. So the next one said, I was told that my only option for extended foster care was to live with my foster parent. We know that's not the case, but that's what the youth says they were told, and that's what they heard, and they felt really trapped because they weren't comfortable with that foster parent. So they sort of felt trapped by that conversation. Another one said, I was told to negotiate rent with my foster parent for extended foster care. Now, if you can think about how uncomfortable that might be, here's someone that was being paid to care for you, and now you're sort of negotiating rent to become a boarder in their house at 18. It's a really weird situation at 18. I don't know if you can recall, I know 18 was a long ago for me, but if you can recall being 18 years old and just the anxiety of that, and what kind of situation that sort of puts you in, which is weird, right? It's a power dynamic around money. The next one is, my transition staffing was strangers asking me questions and checking boxes. So, you know, we know we have transition staffings. Our intent is to help the youth begin to think about where they want to be in the future. But if you can imagine, it's sort of, I liken it to, you know, going into the principal's office, right? Being brought into this room with all these people in the room, some of people you don't know, and literally you're on the hot seat, having to answer questions, you know, at 16, 17, when really all you're thinking about is, what am I going to eat for dinner tonight? And for some youth, where am I going to sleep tonight? And so, you know, we're taking youth that are really in survival mode and asking them to make major life decisions in a really uncomfortable and very much not normal. That's not how normal transition conversations happen. Typically, I know with my children, you're driving in the car and you're having those windshield time, right? And you're having those conversations with them. And that's how we normally talk. Or as with my daughter, her last year of high school was just all, you know, screaming and yelling that I wasn't listening to her wanting to go to a private school and pay $65,000 a year. But that's okay, because we got through that. And she's a Knoll now, so we're all good. But just things to think about sort of as we talk about normalcy and, you know, how youth go from being 16, 17 to be choosing what major they want to have and what school they want to go to and how they're going to pay their bills. These are massive decisions and massive conversations that don't take place just 1 hour, you know, once at 16 and once at 17. So again, things for us to consider as we talk about this. And the last one is, which actually was shared by a lot of youth, is I don't remember having a transition staffing. I just remember my group home telling me that I had to be out on my birthday. And, you know, I ran a group home and I remember these two young men that had really grown up there that were leaving. And I was like, oh, this is so great. And I totally forgot to say happy birthday. Right. So you just think about that, like it's their 18th birthday, but that's not what we're focused on. We're focused on where are they going to live tomorrow. And I just think that's it's harsh of us as a system. And so I ask all of us, again, myself included, we've all made these, had these conversations. And I think sometimes we just forget who these youth are and sort of where they're at emotionally and developmentally for some of these conversations we're having. And so with that, I think I get to turn over to the people you've been waiting to hear from, the faces and the voices of our youth. And first, so they're going to start with their transition stories. And so first, we're going to start with Diamond. And Diamond is going to school at UCF with a major in psychology.
Hi, thank you so much for that great introduction, Dr. Wynter. Like that information, like it brought up so many things that this is kind of spontaneous, but I wanted to say this one statement before I go into my story, that even though we are talking about maybe some of the negative things that come with the independent living programs that we go through, I want to say this, and I think I can speak for John and Rayla as well, that even though there are some negatives, this is an amazing opportunity for us, like coming from a life that may have been all negative, all sadness, trauma, and hurt, to be able to have the opportunity to get support to turn our life around. I want to emphasize that me and John and Rayla, I would like to believe, are forever grateful for what we do get, and we're trying to just make this better. With that being said, I'm going to go into my story though. So if you guys were in the last webinar that we did based on placement, you would remember my placement story. So my transition story kind of starts with that as well. I was going through a placement, my first one with people that I didn't really necessarily know. I was going into my first foster home, and I was just so sad, so depressed. I was crying, I was hyperventilating, it was a whole mess. And basically my case manager said, hey, don't worry, because now that you're in the foster care program, once you turn 18, you'll be able to get your own apartment anyway, and you'll be good. So I was like, you know what? That is pretty nice. So I kind of held on to that for a few months while I was in this foster home that wasn't necessarily the best environment for me. I just kept holding on that you'll be able to get your apartment. Don't worry, everything's going to be fine. So once I turned 17, we had a master staffing, and it's a transitional staffing because most people don't call it master staffing where I come from. That's where it's called, but a transitional staffing nonetheless. And I kind of just laid out my plan. I was like, I want to get my own apartment when I turn 18. And then when I go to college, I want to go to NYU and all this good stuff. And basically they all looked at me and I swear they wanted to laugh. They said, Diamond, unfortunately, number one, you cannot go out of the state in order to receive support from us. And number two, you cannot be in your own apartment after you turn 18 until you go to college. And I was like, what is this? I was very confused. So I basically had to take all of that information from the meeting and be like, let's make a new plan. And I had to make that new plan in 6 months because that's when they were coming back to figure out what I was doing. So for that whole 6 months, I was like, okay, I have to figure out what I'm going to do. And I basically was trying to ask my case manager questions. She couldn't really answer them with certainty. So I kind of just had to go off of this is what we kind of know you can do. So I basically was like, okay, I guess I'm going to stay in extended foster care and go to college in, I guess, the first college that accepts me in Florida, because that's all I can do. That was the plan. Of course, it didn't go exactly as planned because life happens and different stuff happens. But I ended up living in another household after I turned 18. That was quite toxic, if I do say so myself. To paint the picture, she almost kicked me out because a ice drink that I had bought with my own food stamps, she decided to drink it on her own, and I didn't find that okay. So if that paints a picture of what that home was like, and just to know that that necessarily didn't have to happen. And the only reason why it did is because I wasn't given all the information that I needed to make a conformed plan of what I wanted to do is quite sad. So I say this story only to urge independent living workers and people that are directly involved in the independent living plans for these youth to have clear communication, because in that, the youth can make the best choice for them, and they can ultimately make the best choice for something that might affect their whole entire life. So with that, I will transition on to Rayla.
Hello, my name is Rayla James, and some of you may also remember me from the last webinar. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about my transition story to independence. But before that, I am 19 years old and I was in foster care for 4 years, just to give a little background. So for my transition, my case was a little bit different because I was in foster care and then I was reunified and then I came back into foster care at the age of 18. So I might have had a little bit of different experience than someone who was in the care, from straight through, not being reunified and then coming back into care. So just keep that in mind as well. But during my time in care, I spent majority of the placements in group homes, and I felt like the group homes did not provide me with as much preparation for life skills as they could have. I oftentimes was figuring things out on my own or was asking questions to my guardian ad litem, which would be things like how to apply to college, planning to get an apartment and things like that. But other life skills trainings that if they would have had on these topics, I would have been really interested in attending would be like basic housing skills and cooking. I still don't know how to cook very well. I try, I really do, but it's not for me, unfortunately. So that would have been something, maybe if I had established a passion for that early on, maybe I could be a better cook today, who knows. So with the options that were presented to me as far as aging out, I just knew that there was extended foster care and PES, and I had a very clear path for myself. I knew I wanted to graduate high school and go to college. And I knew that this is the way I perceived the two programs based off the little knowledge that I had and lack thereof. If I asked questions, I felt like people really didn't give me well-rounded answers, was that extended foster care was you get $200 and PES was you get $12.56 for going to college. So with that understanding, it really put pressure on me to make a plan, because my birthday is in December, so I'll be 20 this year. But when I was aging out as a junior, the year prior, I was thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to go into my senior year. I'm going to graduate next May and I'll already be 18, so I can't live off of $200. I had no idea, no one informed me of the other benefits of extended foster care. I only knew that I needed to get into college so that I could get more money, so that I could support myself better and have housing. So with that, luckily, came as a price, I guess you could say, for transitioning to all the different placements, is I had accumulated a lot of credits in school. So I was actually able to just take a couple more classes and graduate early, ahead of my class. So I then started college in the fall, and I was already ready to get my first PES check on my 18th birthday. There weren't a lot of housing opportunities for me during that time. I felt like there wasn't really anywhere I could go. So because of that, I moved in with my boyfriend's family. And soon after, my boyfriend and I got an apartment, and then another apartment, which is where we are today. So why I'm telling you my transition story, similar to Diamond, is that I just want to be a voice for those in the system of care, and I want to share my story as a way to maybe enlighten child welfare workers' thought process on informing kids of the differences between programs, and really laying out all the options, because for me, unfortunately, I didn't have a well-rounded view of the options that I could choose from. So I just want to encourage you all to make sure you guys do that to other youth who will be aging out, whenever they do. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John Watson.
Thank you so much, Rayla. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is John Watson. I am 19 years old, and I myself spent 5 years in the system of care. A little bit of background. I was very fortunate. I'd like to say that I'm one of the better outcomes. I was only placed into 3 different foster homes throughout my time in care, and I stay in one for the majority of my time, just so you all have a little bit of background. Speaking about my transition story, I had a very similar experience as Rayla and Diamond. At 16, I had transition staff come to my home which is where I currently am, to discuss my plans for kind of transitioning to adulthood. I was very comfortable where I was at. As I said, I've stayed in this home for about 4.5 years. So I had already planned to kind of stay here until I turned 18. But the transition team was very adamant about me leaving foster care, just because they believed that since I had family that were willing to take me, that this was not necessarily the best situation for me. However, I in hindsight, I didn't know this, but this would have actually removed me from many of the benefits that I received today, including the PES program, which all the youth on this call are enrolled in and rely heavily on. Because of that, the staff members were very critical of my choices. And as a 16-year-old who did not want to believe anything anybody said, I kind of shut down, and that was basically the end of that transition meeting. And after that, I really didn't hear from anybody until about 6 months later. I'm sorry, 2 years later, almost 6 months before my 18th birthday. And then we were taken, I at that time had a guardian ad litem. She went along with me, and it was just the two of us with an independent living specialist. And she just kind of ran through all of the things that I needed to know upon turning 18, and gave me I'm using my hands here, I don't know if you guys can see me, but a big binder. I'd call it 3 Harry Potter books of width, like solid size binder of just a huge dump of information that was filled with child welfare professional language that didn't really make much sense to me. I was kind of cocky and self-confident. I breezed through high school pretty easily, so I was like, I'm smart, I'll figure this out when the time comes. Turns out I was very wrong. And because I had a rough transition meeting before when I was 16. I didn't really believe that these people had my best interest in mind, and I really kind of stuck to myself. And honestly, if I continued down the path that I was taking, I believe today I would not be here speaking to you all, and I would most likely be homeless. So I'm moving into, honestly, I think the most important part of my transition story, and that is the role of a supportive adult in my life. My guardian ad litem, who also attended that transition meeting with me, took the binder because she knew I would not read it, even though I said, oh yeah, I'll look at it. And she kind of deciphered it and worked with my transition staff and my case managers for me to find the best plan, which was PES. Because I had also had another supportive adult, which, again, I'm so fortunate to have such a supportive foster family. I've lived with a great Haitian family for about 6 years, and I consider them, while we may not be blood, I still do consider them my family. So my foster family, as well as my guardian ad litem, kind of worked together to decide that, working out a kind of a deal to pay like a small fee for rent, which is about half of what I would be paying, not even including utilities if I got an apartment here in Brevard County, Florida. So, I'm very blessed where I am today. And if it were not for what I call my two mothers, who were looking out for me when I wasn't looking out for myself, I don't really think I would have the comfort that I do today, and to some degree the success as well. So my goal is really to advocate for youth, to kind of give them that experience that they may not have, which I was sorely lacking in, and a little bit of knowledge to help them better understand what options are in store for them. So that is my story. Moving on. Just want to make sure. All right. So like Dr. Wynter mentioned before, One Voice Impact, they work very closely with youth across the state to kind of gauge their input and their experience in the system. From that, we have received several youth recommendations regarding 3 major keys. Number 1, improving communications. Number 2, enhancing transition planning, which we discussed earlier. And number 3, which is formalizing supportive adult partnerships. So to speak on the first topic here, improving communications, I would like to pass it back to Diamond.
Hello again. So I'm going to be talking about the recommendations that One Voice Impact has made based on communication in the independent living programs. So our first recommendation is probably the most important to me, which is standardization in the communication of extended foster care in the PES program, and to provide a document to young youth considering or deliberating between these programs so that they have a better understanding of what they are offered, and also that everyone in the state is offered the same thing, so confusion can't be made based on case managers moving jobs in different areas, for example. Our second recommendation is that the people that are most directly tied to the deliberation of these programs with the youth, i.e. the case managers, IL workers, GALs, therapists, etc., anyone who needs to have the information, has training so that they can talk about these programs with the youth, and the youth can pick who they trust most to deliberate on these programs. Thirdly, we would recommend having a little bit more of a revamp on the warm line that we have. Currently, we have Daniel Memorial, and I had a slight experience with them. I just called the warm line to see what it was, like what did they offer, and basically they just directed me to other people. Now, this may be what they thought that their job was at the time, but I have gotten word from Dr. Wynter that we are making improvements so that it's not just directing youth to other people to talk to, but having the information at hand so that when youth call this warm line thinking that they can trust these people to have the information they need, they're not just directed to someone that maybe they already have talked to and don't even trust. Number 4 is we would like the IL workers and specialists to practice clear communication when talking about the PES and extended foster care programs, because as Dr. Wynter emphasized in her previous little speech that she had, we as youth may be getting all the information and you may be telling us everything that we need to know, but inside of our brains, we may not be actually hearing what you're trying to say. So to establish clear communication, basically asking youth along the way, do they understand what's going on? And maybe to repeat back what the case manager has said, therefore we can both be on an understanding. And if they don't have clear communication on something, you guys can talk it out and maybe improve their understanding of the topic. Lastly, I would just like to emphasize that youth in the foster care system may not be the most trusting. And this may be for an array of issues. Just for example, maybe the case manager giving incorrect information before, therefore leading to the youth not trusting them. Maybe the case managers themselves have showed a lack of trust in the youth, therefore making the youth not trust them. Or the youth has gone through several case managers, so they just don't trust anyone at that point. So I say this to encourage IL workers to be patient with the youth, because just as much as it's hard for you to go through this process and to explain it the right way and to make sure that everyone is understanding what they need to understand, it's hard for these youth to trust that everything that they are being told is correctly accurate, or just being in this environment in general. So with that, I go on to Rayla to discuss her recommendations.
Thank you, Diamond. So I will be discussing recommendations from youth through OBI that have been working on recommendations for specifically enhancing transition planning. So the first one is to keep up the conversation. Youth recommend that our transition plan be an ongoing conversation with a supportive adult that we identify. This could be a case manager, guardian ad litem, mentor, group home staff, foster parent, or a combination of many of them. Conversations should be fluid and frequent. Usually what has happened that I experienced, and that like John has experienced, is that we are asking 16 and 17-year-olds in a room full of strangers to make crucial decisions about their future housing, career aspirations, and educational goals during a 1-hour staffing once or twice a year. Think about that for a moment, because that's not normal. We want to change what is considered normal during youth transition to independence. The next one is standardized planning tools. Youth recommend that instead of handing us a binder of documents to read later, that crucial information be presented to us in a more youth-friendly way, such as developmental podcasts, videos, or marketing materials. You could hand us a hard drive, maybe if that's something that the youth would like. And I've spoken to you about that they maybe work with computers better than they do physical materials. We also recommend that these materials be posted on a central website for viewing again if needed. So having a website where they can easily go on and see the different links and say specifically, this is what I want to know about. And they know that maybe if they lose that piece of paper, if they lose that hard drive, they can log back in somewhere and see it. The youth-friendly language. Youth recommend that all documents about transition be developed by youth to ensure is written in a youth-friendly language. Like John said, he got a big binder and it was full of all these words that he did not understand. And probably I wouldn't either at that age. And maybe not even now, I don't know. But developing the documents on the hard drives or the websites or the videos that you implement as resources for those youth should be developed in a youth-friendly language that they can understand and is of their age level and in a way that makes sense to them. Be creative about sharing documents and information. Maybe think about the ways that they could, I'm looking at my points over here. I'm sorry. I want to make sure I hit all my points. Be creative about sharing documents and information. So that just goes back to the planning tools that you are implementing to give to them as a resource. Think of ways that you could give them the information in a way that they'll understand. So think out of the box. And lastly, create a warm line and provide youth during planning. So establish those connections so that youth feel that they can reach out if they have questions, or reach out if they have things that they need to talk about or want to know about specific components to programs. So for me, I keep in contact with a life coach on a monthly basis. And this goes with our last recommendation, which is to youth recommend that transition plan continues with us from foster care through EFC and PES as our goals and aspirations change. So like I keep in contact with a life coach on a monthly basis, it would be very beneficial, even though it may not be required, that other independent living people contact those youth and ask them, maybe on a monthly basis, maybe bi-monthly basis, hey, just checking in. They may not have a specific connection with that person, or once you establish that connection, it could be a normal monthly call, like, hey, how are you doing? Do you have any questions about this program that you're in? I'm on PES, so I would maybe have questions specific to PES. Or do you have questions about applying for food stamps, or looking into local resources in your area? And what I have heard through the OVI calls was another youth who felt like they could not open up to and reach out to these independent living specialists, and that they were scared to because they just didn't want to ask for help. So if independent living specialists took the time to reach out, even though it may not be required of them, it could be really beneficial and help a lot of kids who may be scared to reach out and ask for help. So with that, I'm going to transition to John Watson, who will be talking about formalizing supportive adult relationships.
Great, thank you so much, Rayla. So like Rayla said, communication, of course, is very key. And then also ensuring that we kind of check in with our youth to make sure that they are receiving the supports they need are very important. But as I said in my transition story, I believe that my supportive adult relationship was the most important part of my kind of transition plan. As you can see here, the first bullet, attain permanency before age 18. As I said, I was a very fortunate case where I had already been offered kind of a permanent place before I had turned 18. But for those youth that don't have that kind of opportunity, they're basically on their own, and as Dr. Wynter said, they're in kind of survival mode, and they don't know where they might end up, or where they'll be, putting their head to sleep at night. So I believe that, I'm a little biased, but I think this is as important, if not more, than all of the rest of the points here. Of course, as I said before, I wouldn't be here without the supportive adults in my life, and the youth recommended that all of the, especially transitioning youth, should be offered lifelong connections with supportive adults to be able to offer guidance and the experience that these teenagers are lacking. Of course, we recommend that all efforts are taken to help youth attain permanency before 18. But the youth recommendation was that if permanency cannot be achieved, that a supportive adult, whether it be a foster parent, case manager, guardian ad litem, teacher, coach, and so on, be appointed to help this youth in these kinds of conversations with transition staff and planning. Mentors should try to have a conversation about providing emotional support, as well as advice, guidance, and then potentially financial support for the long term, like a lifelong connection with the youth. It's important these conversations are had because I don't remember who didn't say it, but what may have been said might not be what the youth heard. So it's important that you ask, because if you don't ask, then you really won't know. Youth also recommended that the supportive adult relationship be established with a kind of permanency pact similar to foster club. These permanency pacts would formalize the supportive adult relationship so both parties can be understanding what to expect, and maybe be more trusting of each other, knowing what expectations are, provided going in. And then last but not least, I would also like to mention that everyone on this call today, regardless of your status or position in the child welfare system, can be a youth voice champion. I'd like to think that all of you being on this specific webinar makes you a youth voice champion because you are interested in youth voice, and that alone is very impactful on youth and their lives. Youth Voice Champion, it's not much of a commitment. We just kind of want you guys to take our Youth Voice Pledge, which we will have in the next slide. But, just giving youth a platform to have their voices be heard is what's important. So here we have our Youth Voice Pledge. And then, of course, how you can help. Just a few ways. One Voice Impact is working very closely with several community-based care agencies to create localized youth councils. Myself and Rayla are both a part of a youth council in Brevard County. We are in contact with several other youth across the state who are already a part of their own youth councils. So in your local community, if you do not have a youth council already, ask, why is this not around? One Voice Impact, of course, we are always offering our support. So if you need any kind of advice or guidance, I myself am an intern for One Voice Impact, as well as Dr. Wynter and Miss Brandie are all very passionate about, kind of getting this up and running. And we believe that there needs to be a youth council in every county to help youth voice really be heard. Employing former foster youth as peer supports. That's something that I like to think, of course, I'm not in the child welfare system, but I like to think that's a pretty simple way to kind of show your support for, these aging out youth who may not have opportunities for jobs. Become a youth voice champion. As I said, I think all of you here listening are youth voice champions in your own right. But, just kind of going out of your way to listen to a youth is really what we imagine when we say youth voice champions. So, I don't know if anybody else wanted to hop in on that, but I think that's all I have on that slide.
I just want to say unbelievable. So for you that got to listen to these youth, and I know Brandie and I who get to work with them every day, they are just amazing youth who really care. They are so committed and dedicated. Not only are they willing to share their stories and provide you all recommendations, but they are so committed and dedicated to making things better for youth that come behind them. And I hope everyone gives them a round of applause. I know we can't hear everyone doing so, but I hope you do. We'll open it up if there's any questions. I saw there was a comment from my friend Ginger with the Guardian Ad Litem's office regarding how these recommendations play into one of the transition staffing or transition work groups. And of course they do, because we're all together, right? So we're all working together. So there's a lot of people out there. So I'll open it up if there's any. Okay, I don't see any questions or comments. Please, we will share this. This video will be available. The link will be available to you all. But please feel free to reach out to myself or Brandie if you want us to come train your youth. We have a mini grant out there for anyone who's looking to start a youth council. So lots of opportunities, again, to engage youth voice and to improve our system based on these incredible recommendations. Brandie, do you have anything else you want to say as we wrap up this webinar?
No, I'm just so pleased and grateful, really, is really what I am. Grateful that we had this opportunity today, and just reiterating what Dr. Wynter said. We're happy to have our young people on this call to be able to talk to you, share their lived experience, and enlighten us as we kind of move forward and try to improve our system of care and our transition services specifically, so we can have better outcomes. Thank you.
Awesome. Dr. Dworsky or Jess, do you have anything as we close out?
I'll just say that it was great hearing the young people's stories, and I thought their recommendations were on target, and I hope that some of them are able to get implemented.
I agree. If there's a way that we can implement those, and we at KC Family Programs are learning every day. And so we look forward to supporting the work in Florida. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, thanks for listening to us, guys. We hope you enjoyed this Lunch and Learn. And from my home to yours, we are really grateful for the opportunity to share youth voice across our state. So thank you to FCC for making this possible. Take care.
Thank you.